Greetings commanders and welcome back to another Warpath video. My name is Eagle and in this video we are going to be giving you the top commanders or top officers for tanks. And by tanks we mean light tanks, medium tanks, and tank hunters. These three units over here, we're going to give you some really good officer combos. These combos are going to include 5 officers so that you can mix and match between those and get the best results out of each. Of course, for each combo, we're going to give you our recommendation so that you would know exactly for someone who tested those in fights and how they actually perform with which unit types best. This video basically will conclude our kind of officer series where we'll be giving you top officer combos, but don't worry, we still have a lot of those coming because we know that you guys like those videos. So definitely on this weekend we'll have as well another video coming where we're creating a tier list for officers so that you could know exactly which officers to focus on first, especially for players who aren't really able to whale out in the game and kind of power up multiple officers, which is kind of the majority of players right now because it's really expensive to focus on officers. So if you know exactly which officers to focus on first and which ones can bring you really good value when it comes to combat, then that will help you out a lot in your decision and in your progress in the game as well. Now without further ado, let's get right into this video. Alright, so the first officer we're going to be talking about is Guardian of Truth. Now this is a very excellent officer when it comes to tanks. He performs really good pretty much everywhere, specifically talking about tank hunters because of this really high damage or like pen damage buff, 40% at max level. That is a lot of kind of penetration, especially when you put this on a tank hunter and try to chase down like heavy tanks and super heavy tanks. They will be dealing a lot of damage towards them. And also he has a very solid increased skill damage and also damage coefficient when you're leading a tank troop. He's a very specialized tank officer overall. I understand that this officer is probably a premium option, but you don't have to really max him out in order to get the maximum benefits out of him. If you have this skill over here maxed out, and then you have also a couple of other skills focused on which units you're actually using this on. So for example, you have the firepower buff and you have the pen damage buff. You don't really require much of a damage resistance, especially if you're using this on a tank hunter, because a tank hunter is usually a squishy unit. So increasing the damage resistance by a little bit might help out, but it won't really give you that significant results. So you don't have to actually max out all this officer, but for example, a combo of 4-4-4 for these like 1 and 3 and 4th skill would actually be really beneficial. On the other hand, when you have this officer maxed out, of course, when you awaken it, it will increase the damage resistance of this officer on tank troops, and it has no effect outside of combat. This officer is actually very well-rounded and very strong, and I would definitely recommend using it on any of the tank officers, specifically talking about tank hunters and as well mediums and lights, because it does give a lot of kind of damage buff and damage coefficient as well with their active skill. The second officer we're going to be talking about is Death Adder. The reason why this officer is actually very good is because it also has a decent damage coefficient and as well as some damage resistance buff. But it also has a 40% pen damage buff, which means that it's a very good alternative for Guardian of Truth if you're running it on a tank hunter, because it kind of has a similar stats as well. Unfortunately, it has a lot more durability than its firepower, so if these were actually reversed, it would be much better for a tank hunter, but it still has a 15% damage buff over here, which kind of compensates for it. So 15% damage buff as well as 5% as well. This will be very good overall for a tank hunter. Pairing these two officers, Guardian of Truth and Death Adder, together on a tank hunter would be the best option for you. These are like kind of the top combo for tank hunters that I do highly recommend. So if you're running these two together, that will be actually amazing. So this one over here, when you awaken him, he will have also increased damage resistance and also increased speed by 5%, which is always helpful for tank hunters because they're already mobile. So when you increase their speed, they will be even more mobile on the field. Now this was the second officer that I want to talk about. The third one is actually Winter Huntsman. Winter Huntsman is a very solid officer, and I do highly recommend it when you're running light tanks or mediums. The reason why this officer is actually very good, and even when you're running tank hunters is still good, but I don't highly recommend it because I think it's best run on mediums or lights. And the reason why it's actually very good is because of this massive damage coefficient over here. And when you max it out, you'll also have a rooting skill, which means that you can actually immobilize your enemies or your ground forces that you're attacking for 2 seconds, preventing them from moving as well. So this is actually very, very good, especially when you're chasing down enemy units, let them be howitzers or any other units that are slower than your unit. This will help you out a lot in slowing them down, making your other units catch up or your allies so that you can actually deal more damage to them and completely obliterate their units. It's a very solid overall officer. He does give you a really good combo of firepower buff of 15% and durability as well of 5%, and also some damage resistance buff, which really helps out when you're running mediums because you want them to be a little bit tanky as well, especially when you're fighting stronger units like super heavies or whatnot. They also have a field recovery, which is very, very good. Now this skill over here is probably one of the best, and the reason why this is very good is because you're usually fighting with those troops on the field. So the most use for these is to chase down enemies and kind of get in this cat and mouse fights where you chase down enemies, hit them out, and when there's a lot of them, you can run out fast because you're using fast units on the battlefield. So this helps out a lot because you're always recovering while you're fighting, and this actually really is beneficial as a skill. Now the other officers that I do highly recommend and as well works really well with Winter Huntsman is Blood Mary. The reason why Blood Mary works really well is because she gives you a really solid damage coefficient, not as much as like Winter Huntsman, but it's still really good. But she also extends the prep time of officer skills by 1 second, which also helps out a lot in mitigating some damage from the officers that you're fighting with, and also let them unable to hit your targets for 1 second when she is awakened. She also has another field recovery, which is like very good, so that will be 2% per second of total health. So that's actually very good to recover durability very fast and get back into the fight. She also has a damage buff of 15% and a speed buff of 10% when she's maxed out. So that is really solid because it will help you out, speed up your units really fast, and deal even more damage. Overall, Blood Mary is a very, very good pairing with any of these officers, specifically Winter Huntsman, if you're looking for a very mobile officer combo for your medium tanks or your light tanks to use. Now the final officer for today is actually Utility Officer, and this officer gives you more of a supportive role rather than a dealing damage role, but I do like to actually introduce it in this video because it works really well, especially if you're rocking medium and light tanks together, or 2 of these tanks, and somehow you require like kind of 3 combos or 2 officer combos where you would like to use Tip of the Spear over here. So Tip of the Spear, as we know, gives you out some damage buff, which is 45% when maxed out, and of course when they're awakened, this will be increased to 50%. They also give their allies in 2 map grids as well some firepower increase by 7%, which is also very, very good. Now also over here, there's a 20% firepower boost, which will help you out a lot. Unfortunately, these 2 over here, these 2 skills focus more on damage resist and blast damage resist, which is kind of good when you're running mediums because mediums are the kind of tanks where you want to deal damage, but not too much damage, but still also sustain some damage when, for example, an enemy howitzer hits you with one of their shots. Because you don't want your units to be completely obliterated when they're taking damage, but also you want to deal a lot of damage in return. Because sometimes what players do is actually stand their ground and try to fight back when you're trying to chase them down. So this actually helps out a lot to have some sort of sustainability to mitigate their damage and try to deal as much DPS as possible to them. I hope these kind of combos helped you out a lot and you learn somehow how to mix and match some of these combos to get the best results out of them. Please leave me in the comments below what are your best choices for tank officers so that we can actually know what to use and how to help out the community. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll definitely see you on the next video, which is going to be about officer tiers. Bye bye.